Welcome to the Light Reading Podcast Network. This is one of Light Reading's series of sponsored interviews where we examine topics relevant to the communications sector, and we look at it through the lens of the people and technologies that are driving the industry forward. My name is Phil Harvey. I'm an editor at Light Reading, and today I'm once again joined by Geert Heyninck, VP and General Manager of Broadband Networks at Nokia. Geert, thanks so much for joining me. Good to see you again.
Nice to be here, Phil.
In our last conversation, we talked about the benefits of enterprises moving to fiber optical LANs for campus and corporate connectivity. Today, we're still going to be talking about optical networking in the broadband space, but this time we're going to be focused on PON. And it's a great topic, too, because we're talking about the rise of 25G and 50G PON, which I think is a pretty hot topic on Light Reading as it is elsewhere in the telecom sector. To sort of set the table, the speed of broadband networks, of course, is always climbing. And every time new tiers of speed are available for consumers and businesses, they seem to find ways to use the capacity. Let's get a bit of background as to what's happening here. So what trends are pushing us forward toward these higher speeds?
Well, Phil, you probably know the movie Top Gun. And you know, in the movie, at one point in time, Tom Cruise is making a statement like, I feel the need for speed.
Yep.
Well, if you look at our industry, this is exactly the way that our customers have been thinking for a while. And how did they do this? They look at the peak hours, and in the peak hour, they say they take 5-minute counters, they take 15-minute counters, and then they look at the average across all users, and they happily tell us that the average peak speed is really between 70 megabits per second and 20 megabits per second. What this is hiding, these measurements, is basically a totally different traffic pattern that happened over the last couple of years. We are now looking really at a traffic pattern where you have very short-lived but very high-speed bursts of traffics which are happening in the network. And let me try to make this as concrete as possible. 15 years ago, when I was doing PowerPoint on my PC, I clicked, it came from my hard disk, it opened.
Right.
I was making some changes, I clicked on save, it was gone. Everything instantaneously. In the last 15 years, we have done tremendous technology progress on all different fronts. And you know what? My experience is worse. Because those files are now in the cloud. I click on the file and I wait, and then it opens. Even worse, I change something, I save, and I wait, and I wait, and I wait even much longer. And then it's done. So in the progress of 15 years, we got worse. And why is this? This is because the speed, the real short-lived bursts that I'm getting is not what it used to be. So if you think back, in the past, a hard disk is basically a speed which is around 7 to 8 gigabit per second. That's the sort of speed you need to really have only the same performance as you used to have in the past. And frankly speaking, my PC today has an SSD, which is even higher speeds. And that's why I believe firmly that those new applications, this new traffic patterns will really drive a need for an alternative way of measuring speed. If Tom would be around, he would probably be saying, I feel the need for peak, not for speed.
Yeah, that does. It's interesting because I don't usually think of it that way. I usually think of people demanding more from their network, but you're right. What they were raised on, what they were used to, was the incredibly responsive, instantaneous feedback of a hard drive or a local computer. So whatever we produce in the cloud, however sophisticated, has to feel like that, or we're never going to feel like we're, instantly connected. That's a really interesting insight. So I think that dovetails nicely with our next topic. So Nokia, of course, recently launched 50G PON. Where do you see the need for those higher speeds?
Well, fiber is no longer being used just for residential market. It basically comes to all different places, and it's also connecting enterprises, industry sites, and the likes. Now, if you think about residential markets and if you think about enterprise markets, 25 gig probably will survive for the years to come, certainly for the smaller enterprises. If you really start focusing on the bigger enterprises, or let's say the medium-sized enterprises, that's where you need more capacity. And that's exactly where the 50 gig PON is really coming in. Now, with the launch of the 50 gig PON, we basically have now a full range of technologies available on the PON, be it GPON, XGS PON, 25 gig PON, 50 gig PON, you name it. We have it available. And the beauty of this is that an operator can really select the technology which is best fit for each service. So if you think about it from a mass volume multi-gigabit residential service, then probably XGS PON, 25 gig PON makes sense. If you think about it from an enterprise perspective, 25 gig PON, 50 gig PON is the right choice.
Yeah, it does make sense that you need multiple options for multiple sizes of business. And of course, depends on what the businesses are into too. What you had talked about with larger enterprises. I mean, we're seeing this on the reporting side. When we're talking to larger enterprises, they are experimenting with AI. They're doing more, visually interesting graphics and rendering and stuff like that. They definitely need those peak level high speeds. Let's see. You mentioned 50 gig for enterprise connectivity, of course. Traditionally, that kind of connectivity was delivered over point-to-point technologies. How is PON changing the game there, and how is that architecture different?
Well, 15 years ago, let's say the world was very simple. It was like you have PON technology, that's for residential, and you have point-to-point, which is for enterprise. But guess what? PON has evolved. It has evolved in capabilities, whether it's speed, whether it's reliability, whether it's security sort of features. And suddenly, operators do have an alternative technology out there that they are deploying everywhere. I mean, if you think about point-to-point, they are very selective where they do this, but they now have a network which is available everywhere, which provides actually the capabilities that you would need for an enterprise perspective. And using this network for enterprises, that makes totally business sense. And because it obviously, if you only have one sort of network, it allows you to be much more cost efficient, to have a lower energy consumption, it's easier to scale. So a lot of benefits. We actually did a study around this, and the study shows that if you do an enterprise service on top of a residential network, from a TCO perspective, you can save around 30%. And from an energy perspective, if you compare point to multipoint with point to point, you have a 40% energy saving. So that's basically a no-brainer from a business perspective. And it's not just us telling this. Omdia has done a survey with different operators just to double check, are you doing enterprise services on top of a PON network? 80% of the PON operators basically said they are doing this already today. Maybe not to the super high-end enterprises, but they are starting at, let's say, the smaller ones, and they are growing this gradually. Let me give you one example. Colt, that's a pan-European service provider who focuses only on enterprise. They are now in the process of adding their point-to-point network, complementing their point-to-point network with a PON network to address the enterprises. They do this on XGS PON. They do this on 25 gig PON. XGS PON for the 1 gigabit service, 25 gig PON for the 10 gigabit service. They have announced publicly that they are doing a 50 gig trial with us to enhance their service offering that they can deliver towards the enterprise.
That's fantastic. And Colt is a huge, supplier of bandwidth to enterprises all over Europe, and they also have international services as well. So that's a big endorsement for 50 gig PON for sure. Back to the idea of enterprise use, though, security is a huge concern there. So even if the PON network architecture is more modern, how do you make sure that it stays secure, especially when we're talking about a very near future where quantum computing could, break the current encryption that we have, in today's computers and today's networks?
Yeah, so we may have a slightly different opinion as to when quantum computers will be available. I think it's probably 5 to 10 years down the road. But nevertheless, we know they will come. And then you can make it a very simple statement and say, well, that's no problem because that's in the future. We can simply deploy our networks like we do today. But this is for going on one specific topic. There's a principle which is called harvest now, decrypt later, which basically means that you are capturing the packets as they are today. You sort of snoot them, you keep them for the next 5 to 10 years until there's a quantum computer, and then you decrypt. Now, this sort of activity is only relevant for very specific segments. And what are the axes which are important to consider to see whether this is important? First of all, the data that you capture that needs to be relevant. If I book a trip to the Bahamas 5 years, 10 years from now, nobody cares. However, my social security number, my health records, trade secrets, classified government data, they are still very relevant 5 to 10 years from now. So it is important to sort of safeguard those. The second element, which is important, is that the machines that are being used, so the hardware systems that are using the data, are still relevant in that period. And think, for instance, about the banking systems. Today, the banking systems are still working on mainframes. They have no intent to move to anything else. So 10 years down the road, this will still be an important one. Think about connected cars. And we all talk about this, but developing a car is like, well, depending whether you're Chinese, it's 3 years. When you're not Chinese, it's 5 years development time
it's a lot.
To have a new prototype. Then you're probably selling it for 7 years. And then you're still driving it for another 10 years. So the next 20 years, you're still with that specific car. So it's very clear that there are certain segments which will become vulnerable over time, and you need to prepare yourself for a post-quantum era. And that's what we have been introducing in our 25 gig and 50 gig PON solution. And what are sort of the key elements which are important here to make sure that this is safe? First of all, the encryption key. The length of the encryption key needs to be long enough. So we are increasing the encryption key from 128 to 256 bits. By the way, formal statements today is that 128 is good enough, but just to be safe, things are evolving. We are moving to 256. The second thing is, when you generate a key, it needs to be truly randomized. And we are using hardware entropy, so randomness in the hardware, to really generate that key. So it's not like an algorithm like it was in the past. It is really entropy. Third thing is you need to distribute the first keys out of band. So they can't be intercepted and they can't be reasoned about. So this is done out of band. And then obviously on a regular basis, you need to renew the keys. These are all elements that we have introduced in our system, both on 25 and 50 gig. So in order to make them quantum resistant for enterprise connectivity.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like you said it so well. The rest of the world is not going to be ready for quantum when quantum arrives, and we'll go for several years before where we have entire sectors that just aren't going to be up on that technology and using it. So in the meantime, PON can be extra secure because you've increased the encryption key length, you've made sure that the keys are randomized, distribute the first piece out of band, and then, of course, renewing the keys regularly to take as many precautions as possible in those networks so that information still stays safe and secure. I think let's keep going here with another kind of enterprise related topic, but it also touches on consumers too, and that's this idea of kind of the other things that make people value their internet connection. You know, we have speed, of course, but they're also very concerned with uptime and reliability, especially as we get more and more dependent on the internet, like you were kind of alluding to earlier. These service disruptions that happen not too frequently anymore, but they're when they do happen, they're more and more impactful in our lives because of our work and home activities being so tied to the internet. So how are the next generation of PON technologies, helping us get closer to a 100% uptime network?
Well, you're completely right, Phil. I mean, having a service outage nowadays is, basically sometimes making the headlines of the news. I mean, you've seen this happening. And
Yep.
connectivity has become so critical, so important that basically people are no longer accepting this. And there can be a lot of reasons why you can have a outage. This can be based on, well, you can have a fiber cut, you can have a power failure,
Mhm.
or you can have issues based on the equipment. Now, the good news is if you look at the PON and the PON situation as it is today, the PON today has around an outage on an average, industry average of 20 minutes per year, which is actually not that bad. It's actually a quite good number. But we have taken steps for the high-end enterprises to really bring this down. The first step that we have taken is from an equipment perspective. We have introduced equipment, which is called MF. That's detail, doesn't really matter. But we have introduced equipment which is supporting 6 nines. 6 nines means not a single point of failure. That means whatever breaks in the system keeps on running. With this, we are reducing those 20 minutes towards 4 minutes. On top of that, we have been developing a digital twin which is combining the passive as well as the active and make this into a single view. And we have put some AI around this, and nowadays you can't have any technology talk without AI. But we have been putting some AI around this, which helps you to detect disruptions earlier. So actually to predict some of the outages that you may have. And if not that, it will help you to localize the issue much faster. And for instance, tell you that you need to go to that side part of the fiber in order to repair the cut rather than trying to figure it out. This is also reducing the downtime towards 2 to 3 minutes. And then the last step that we have taken is, in an enterprise, really the high-end enterprises, you have something which is called dual homing. So you have 2 fibers, which comes from the enterprise, goes 2 different routes, it goes to different locations. This is now also something that we have implemented within the PON, which is called Type-C redundancy. So you can push the downtime now down to less than 1 minute. So we are achieving number which is lesser than 1 minute, which is sort of equivalent what you get from a point-to-point sort of application. But we do this at half of the price of a point-to-point connection. So this is an enormous progress.
Yeah, that's a huge difference, especially when it comes to, like you said, a lot of the downtime is caused by actually the physical network, which then requires, a whole different set of skills in order to locate, assess the problem, fix the problem. Like you were saying, in the PON network with digital twins, with AI sensing for quicker location of repairs and other fiber issues, you can cut that downtime down even farther and keep people connected even longer. The last question I have as we're kind of wrapping up is really one that's targeted toward, Light Reading's audience and of course your customers. Where do you see the 25G and 50G PON sectors heading in the coming years, and how quickly do you expect operators to adopt them?
Yeah, I'm a firm believer of the fact that each and every PON technology has its own sweet spot. So it really comes down, what is your demand? What is your business case? And that's also why we are investing as Nokia in each and every technology. And we are investing in GPON, XGS PON, 25 gig PON, 50 gig PON. And actually, we are already working on 100 gig PON. If you look at XGS and 25 gig PON, that are very mature technologies. They are out there between 5 and 10 years already. And they are well optimized for mass market residential services. So if you think about multi-gigabit networks, so customers or non-customers, so CSPs who are offering a higher bandwidth than a 1 gigabit, so it's like 2 gigabit, 5 gigabit, 8 gigabit, there are around 170 networks out there from a worldwide perspective that are offering multi-gigabit broadband. This is 3 times as many as it was 2 to 3 years ago. So this is going rapidly. And this is basically to address what I was talking about, the peak bandwidth demands that you see with the working in the cloud or downloading games, things like this. Now, that trend will continue. So we will see that 25 gig, which is rather cost optimized at this stage, will really serve this sort of mass market. Just to throw a couple of numbers at you. Today we have 20 deployments of 25 gig. We have more than 2 million lines which are capable of supporting 25 gig. That means that we could serve 60 million users already with 25 gig when it is activated by the operator. So 25 gig is basically out there. It's easy to activate. It's there to stay for that segment. If you now turn to 50 gig, situation is slightly different. Yes, we launched the product, but this is the situation that we were in with 25 gig 5 years ago. It still needs to go to the maturity curve. And maturity curve means ecosystem, also means cost evolution. At this point in time, it's very clear that 50 gig is not there with the right cost point for a residential play or for the, let's say, the low-end enterprise play. But if you think about high ARPU enterprise services, the business case for 50 gig is already good. And it's better than a point-to-point solution. So definitely there is that market window already opening for 50 gig. So if you look at it, to summarize, in short, 25 gig is here and is scaling fast. 50 gig PON needs a bit more time, but there are already niche applications where this would be a good solution for our customers.
Yeah, and I have a feeling that as like you were saying, as 25 gig PON is out there with 60 million users potentially covered if when the technology is activated. That means that cost curve will go down even more quickly when it comes to 50 gig PON. So yeah, with that, plus the demand of bandwidth on the other side, I can see that maybe happening even quicker than we would have thought a few years ago, for sure. Well, this has been a great discussion of where PON technologies are going. We're just about out of time. I want to thank everybody who's listening to this for listening to the podcast. If you're hearing this podcast series for the first time, please do go and check out our past episodes and our past interviews at lightreading.com. Geert, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.